episode of Let's Talk Business is Turning Time into Profit with Christy Lawrence. I'm really excited to have Christy here today. We'll learn a little bit more about her in a moment. Some housekeeping before we get started. This is being recorded, so if you missed anything, wanted to hear anything again, share it with a colleague. It'll be in your email later today. Please mute yourself in between asking questions. You're more than welcome to ask questions at any time, but to kind of keep down on background noise, because this is being recorded, if you could mute yourself. If you see that I have muted you, I might have just noticed some background noise. That doesn't mean that you're not allowed to talk, just that I was trying to circumvent that. So just shoot me a note and I can unmute you if you have a question. If you're having trouble hearing us, I highly recommend phone audio in the audio pane of your GoToTraining, the task menu. There's an audio pane. You can do phone audio or computer audio. If you can hear just fine on computer, that's great. If you're having issues, phone is usually a little better. And then, like I said, we want this to be really interactive, so please feel free to answer questions at any time. You can either use this chat box, and Christy and myself can see this, or you can raise your hand right here. That just lets us know that you like to ask a question using audio. Are there any questions about that? Well, what is the Washington Center for Women in Business, and why are we doing these Let's Talk Business webinars? So we are a women's business center funded in part by the U.S. Small Business Administration, and our whole mission is to help women either start a business, or if they're an existing business, how can we help strengthen you or grow your business so that you can be successful long term. And you can see on the screen, those are just some of the things that we cover. Really, if there's a block for you, a roadblock, a hurdle that you're having trouble overcoming, we want to make sure you get to your goal. So just let us know, and we can help with a wide variety of business-related issues. And we do this through workshops like this, either online or in person. We have in-person workshops, but we do a lot of one-on-one coaching. So today we'll kind of be talking about, your businesses in general, but when we get to those one-on-one business coaching sessions, that's where we can really take your business, your goals, and talk specifically and put a plan into action for you. We are in Lacey, Washington, our offices, but we cover the whole state of Washington. So if for some reason you're not close by, we do phone call, email, Skype, this screen sharing like this GoToTraining. We can make it work. The first time talking with us is free. After that, it's $25 for a 50-minute session. However, if that $25 is a barrier for any reason, we do have scholarships available. We never want that $25 to be a barrier to your success. So please let us know. My name is Tracy Hansen. I'm the program manager. My contact information is on there. Christine Buckley is who you meet with one-on-one. She's our business coach. She's also fluent in Spanish. If any of you have Spanish-speaking colleagues that might need assistance, you can also contact our office coordinator, Ryan, to schedule an appointment with Christine. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Christy.
Myself. Okay, so there I am. I'm unmuted. Now you guys get to see how organized my desktop is because I didn't have my master screen pulled up. But I am super excited to be here. My mission is really to support women business owners, but not just to support them in their business and their profitability, but if I had to sum up what I most want you to take out of this and what I hope everyone who I work with, whether it's in an informal setting like this, a speech, one-on-one and a client, the number one thing I want for everyone I interact with is actually to work less. So I know that sounds kind of strange for probably a lot of you guys because we live in a culture that really values working more. I thought this was some really great research, but of course we know that Americans probably work more than the French, right? But we also work more than the English, the Japanese, and the Germans. And 40% of women say they work more than 40 hours a week. So I would love to hear from you guys that are on this webinar use the little raise your hand screen, but raise your hand if you have worked more than 40 hours sometime this year, 1 week this year.
I don't know how to do that.
There's a little on the left hand of the chat button, there's a little hand. So you can just click that little hand or type in the chat box, yes, if you can't find the little hand.
And I see we have one hand raised.
So my guess is most of us at some point have. What's interesting, we're working more, and not only are we working more, but productivity is skyrocketing. So productivity in America has increased 400% per worker. So it's not just that we have more people working, but individually per worker since 1950. I mean, can you imagine if you had a 400% increase in your profits or in your time, what that would look like in your business? So that's a lot of productivity increase. So we've really bought into this message: work more, be productive, be busy. But the reason why I am so passionate, there's two, but the first one that I'm so passionate about helping people work less, is because what's really interesting is even though productivity has increased and skyrocketed, at the same time, happiness levels have consistently gone down. So we're working more and we're less happy. And this is from a research article by Stefano Bertolio, where basically his hypothesis is that the reason that happiness levels are going down is because we're more absorbed by work and have less time and energy for relationships. So, and those are the things that fill us up. The reason, though, that really this gets to the heart of why I'm so passionate about it is about 6 months before this picture was taken. This is my grandfather after he had a stroke and that put him into severe dementia. We were having a conversation over grandpa and just over Thanksgiving and just talking about life. And what he shared with me was 6 words, or I think it's actually 11 words, that really changed my life. And he said, I wish I would have paid more attention to my life. And this was a guy who was super active, engaged. He got a Harley when he was 60 for the first time. So for him to say that was really profound. And what it made me realize is one of the reasons that we don't pay attention is because we don't have the time. So I like to do a quick little exercise. You can just grab a scratch piece of paper, but to write down everything that you did last weekend. So what did you have for breakfast on Saturday? Who did you see on Sunday? And I'll give you guys a minute to kind of think about that. Just everything that you can remember about last weekend. So I'd love to hear from some of you guys in the chat or just by the audio. Was that easy or hard to remember everything that you did last weekend? Easy, hard, easy. So kind of a spectrum of both. Hard, yeah, easy. It's like we're about 50-50, right? So if you wrote easy, can't remember my breakfast on Saturday. It helps if you have the same breakfast every day, right? And, but we're very focused, right? Most of the time when I ask people to write down their, it was your birthday, happy birthday, Rebecca, to their to-do list first. And for most people, it's so much easier to write down your to-do list than what you did on the weekend and how you spent this time, right? And that gets to the heart of that's why it's so hard to pay attention to our lives. We're so busy, we're so focused on the future that it's hard to really soak in what we're doing on a regular basis. So the second part of this equation, so I talk about turning time into profit, is the profit part. So I'm not about having everybody just lay on the beach all day, every day, and enjoy their lives and be on vacation. I think if we were all, millionaires and had trust funds, I would certainly support that. But most of us have financial needs. So raise your hand or type in the in the box if you have some financial need in your life in terms of bills to pay, responsibilities. Yes, yes. Definitely, of course, right? So this whole great thing about just paying attention to your life and having time, like the other part of that is the profit part. Yes, but how do you do that in a way where you're still profitable? And I put this definition of profit up here because I think it's really important, especially that first part of it, a valuable return and gain. So that's the framework that I think about how I spend my time is it adding value? Am I getting a return? What am I gaining? And as a business owner or someone in business, it's really easy to get caught up in doing and all of these obligations and not ask those questions about how you're spending your time. So that's what I want to talk to you guys about today is how can you do a better job of that? There's a framework for focus that I think about. This is something I learned from an amazing writing teacher, Jen Loudon. And she uses this analogy of thinking about your life as pots on the stove, right? And so here's a picture of me at a cooking class. I'm making caramel, which first time I've ever made caramel. But if you think about an oven, it has most ovens, unless you have a super fancy chef oven, has 4 burners. And if you have things going on 4 burners at the same time, that's probably the most of us can handle when we're cooking. I don't think I can even handle 4 burners going when I'm cooking, to be honest with you. But if we use that same analogy for our life, we only have 4 burners that we can use at the same time. And yet there's all of these areas that are super important to us. Our faith, our finance, our work life, food, fitness, our health, family, friends, hobbies, right? So how many of those, when you think about those framework for focus, those 6 kind of big buckets of your life are important to you? So you can write in the chat number. If you had to say which of these 6 are important to you or how many of these 6 are important to you, what would you say? 5? All of them? Yeah. For me, all 6. Absolutely.
And Sash, I see your hand is raised. Do you have a question, Sash?
All 6? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, maybe not.
I'll wait and see. And feel free to interrupt me, you guys, anytime in the chat, or as we're talking, community, right? So that could be under our kind of family, friends, but community. And this is what makes it so hard. So if we think about 4 burners, but for most of us, we have at least 6 buckets that are important. It's nearly impossible to balance it all at the same time. And so we have to be willing to make choices, to say no to things, and to actually say no to things that are important to us. I feel like balance is a myth. And so how do we make strategic choices about how we're spending our time, knowing that some things are going to be out of balance all of the time? So there's 4 principles that I teach around this. The first is to start with your time and plan for profit. The second is purpose over productivity. The third is don't hustle, aim for alignment. And then the 4th is your actions are your priority. So we're going to talk about each of these a little bit today. Before we do that, I would love for you guys, if you have a phone next to you or if you're on your computer, in order for us to be able to stay in touch, if you go to Facebook, I'd love you to find the Time to Profit group. It's Facebook.com/group/Time to Profit. And you can join that group. You'll have to request it and I'll approve you. But I do all kinds of fun stuff around these 4 principles on a regular basis, but also around a lot of sales and marketing planning too. So if you have a business and you're interested in that, make sure to connect with me on that Time to Profit group. So it's on Facebook, it's group/Time to Profit. Or if you just search time to profit, a group should come up. So there's a page and a group. I don't post to the page very much. The groups, I like to be more interactive, so that's an easier way to do that. And if you can't find it, I can type it in here too before we get off the call today. Okay, so the first thing that I do anytime I meet with a client is start with time. That surprises a lot of people. They come to me because they want to be more strategic in how they approach their business and their marketing. And the first thing I do with every single client is have them sit down and go through their ideal day. Oh, thank you so much, Tracy, for posting that. And I actually did this. I had a volunteer come up on stage and do this at the Women in Business Conference in Richland where I was speaking. And it's so funny because what people realize as soon as we do this, the way I do the exercise, the way you can do it for yourself, is to basically go through and think about if you had your ideal day that was a work day. So you're not on vacation, you're not at the beach, you still have that profit equation that you're thinking about for your time, but you don't have the normal constraints that you would have. So say you normally have a client that you meet with at 7 a.m. or you have to be at your job at 6 a.m. This is a world where you get to set your schedule. So to kind of bracket off what you have to do now, but also remember you are going to go to work at some point in the day and do some work and get some things done. And when we do this, what I have every client do is start with you're laying in bed, you wake up, open your eyes, what time is it, right? Because a lot of times we get up at a time that's not ideal for us. But starting with what's your ideal time to wake up? Then what do you do after you wake up? What happens next? And you'll notice for some of these, I put some examples on here, right? We'll go down pretty specifically, like, okay, how long does it take you to make coffee? How long does it take to eat breakfast? Okay, then what happens next? The reason I start with time and the ideal, not what actually is happening, is it provides the framework for how limited our time actually is. And if you own your own business, you have the luxury of managing that in some ways differently than if you work for somebody else. But even if you work for a corporation and have no desire to run your own business, by at least putting on paper what's ideal, you start to honor what's true for you, and then you can stay open to possibilities that get you closer and closer and closer to that. Does anyone have any questions about that as a process and how you might be able to do that for yourself? There's a couple seconds. I would really encourage everyone on here to take 20 minutes and walk through this for themselves and just kind of notice what comes up. The other thing when we talk about starting with time is most of us plan our lives based on every day being at peak capacity. So I used to do communications, public relations, media outreach for Department of Energy Science Lab. And they did work on the electric grid. And I love this metaphor where they talk about how most of the time our energy grid is nowhere near peak capacity, that there's all this energy available. But it has to be built that way because if it's running at capacity and then all of a sudden there's a spike, the whole system will shut down. And the challenge is for most people that I know, especially women, because we have those 6+ buckets that we're trying to manage, we are constantly running at peak capacity. And then life happens. There's an emergency, a kid gets sick, a client has a crisis, and the whole system starts to shut down because there's no bandwidth. So anytime I'm doing planning for clients where we're accounting for time, I always cap our time at 80% of what's actually available. And that's because things will happen that are going to take more time. And if you haven't given yourself some space, you're going to shut down the whole system. And most of us live in that kind of system shutting down, re-operating kind of that stress all the time. So start with time. That's my number one principle. But then plan for profit. And this is really important whether you have your own business or whether you are working for somebody else. We live in a culture that basically says more money is better. And so when we have an opportunity to do something where we're going to have more money, whether it's a promotion at work, a new job opportunity, a big client, our inclination is almost always to say yes, and then to figure out the time part later. The reality is when you know what your financial goals are and you plan for profit, you can say no to things that aren't in alignment and don't fit your time goals. So the way that I make my clients do this, I shouldn't say make, encourage my clients to do this, is to start by looking at their current personal overhead. So what is your overhead on the personal side every month? So how much is your mortgage? How much do you pay in gas? What are your daycare costs? What are your utilities? Everything. How much do you spend on clothes? What do you spend on groceries? How much do you spend going out? How much do you spend at the gym membership, right? What's all of your personal overhead? And then what are your short-term goals? What are your 5-year goals from a financial standpoint? Do you have debt that you want to get paid off? Are you saving money for a down payment? Do you want to buy a new car? Do you want to go on vacation? And so for each of those short-term goals, those 3 to 5 year goals, if it's a 5-year goal, I'm pretty sure that's 60 months. So you'll take whatever the total number is of that short-term goal, say it's $30,000, and divide it by 60. That goes then into your personal overhead number, right? So let's do that. I'm just going to use a little calculator right now. So if I take $30,000 for a short-term goal over 60 months, that's an additional $500 a month that I want to add to my overhead. And then we do the same thing for long-term goals, retirement, paying my house off, buying a vacation home, right? And put that divided over how many months you have into your overhead. That will give you your actual profit goal for yourself, which is a really useful piece of information because it tells you in order to hit your short-term goals and your long-term goals and maintain your quality of life, how much revenue, whether you have a business, a salary from a company, that you need to be generating every month in order to hit those goals. So then if all of a sudden you find out that your profit goal for yourself personally is $100,000 a year, but you have an opportunity that's going to pay you $150,000 a year, but it's going to take 30% more of your time, you might say no to that, right? Because you know you can reach your financial goals without having to sacrifice your time. Now, on the business side, we do a very similar exercise where we look at the business overhead, short-term goals, taxes, and then figure out what is the profit goal for their business. And that becomes a tool that we use to do strategic planning. But I encourage everybody to do the time planning and the profit planning right out of the gates for yourself, because it starts to put into context what you actually need to earn for profit and how much time you actually have. So what questions do you guys have about this first principle on starting with time and planning for profit? You can type it into the chat box. type yes or raise your hand if you're going to do either the time exercise, the profit exercise, or both of them. That is a great question. So the question is, how do we not become daunted by a very large difference in what we currently earn and what we see we need to earn based on the goals? So I think about this. Okay. And if you're not sure the value for your business yet, as I like to think about gap planning. So if there's anywhere in your life, whether it's number of clients or for your business, whether it's profitability, whether it's revenue to financial goals, how do you start to close the gap, right? Because say there is a $10,000 a month gap in terms of, in order to hit your current lifestyle, your short-term goals, and your long-term goals, it is going to feel daunting. How do you all of a sudden increase revenue by $10,000 right now? Most of us can't do that immediately. So then it becomes, okay, what would it look like to close this gap by 10%? Right? Is there maybe 10% of my spending of my lifestyle that I'm willing to sacrifice for some of these short-term goals or long-term goals? Or how can I earn 10% more income in the next 12 months? Are there other opportunities, right? So to break it down and to have a plan to say, I want to close this gap in 5 years versus trying to close it immediately. And then the mind loves to answer questions. And so what I love about this is when you ask the question, how do I close the gap in the next 5 years? Then you can start getting more specific answers for yourself. And it's going to be different for every person. But if you just feel overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, I could never make that money. How am I going to make $10,000 more per month? That feels overwhelming and it's easy to shut down. So I'd be very specific in the time frame you want to close the gap and how much you need to close the gap for. Oh, yes, and it'll be recorded too, but I can definitely send out the presentation. Yeah. So when you say profit planning, but you don't know the value of your business yet, can you say a little bit more, Martona, about when you say the value of your business, where you're at in your cycle that you're struggling with that in terms of profit planning?
And feel free to unmute yourself if it's easier to talk instead of type it all out.
Oh, yeah. Tamara, unexpected things happen, right? So you have the goal, but then something, and life is unexpected. Unexpected things will happen on the financial front. They will happen on the time front. So that's why I always tell people when we're doing goal planning to round up on time. Like, it's going to take you more time than you think. So if you think something's going to take you 2 hours, it's probably going to take you 4. So round up to anything in terms of how much time you have. And then the same thing with money. It's going to cost you more than you think. So to plan for that in advance and give yourself those margins, both on the financial side and the time side. And sometimes unexpected things happen and you have to change the plan. And that can be really scary. But when you have it written down and you know it, it's easier to make those choices about what to change in the existing plan.
Oh,
was it basically over now?
Hello?
Sorry, someone was, hello. So I'll wait until we'll come back to the question about valuing business. I'm not a business valuation expert, but I have some thoughts about for when people are starting out or they're trying to increase their profits. The way that I look at it is a little bit different than just a pure business valuation. I have a different thing. So from a business perspective, I like to always show this. There's really 4 pillars of profit that are going to really make or break any business. And then there's some foundational pieces underneath that. So the foundational pieces are planning. I think It's really hard for small business owners who get into businesses because they love what they do and they just want to go out and do great work, which is so admirable. But the challenge is without a plan, it's easy to actually end up spending a lot of time without that profitability piece in place and then get burned out and frustrated because you haven't taken the time to figure out what do you need to charge, how many clients do you need to have, or the other thing I see happen when people don't have good strategic plans is that they basically start to just say yes to any sales and marketing. So spend money here, do this, but they don't know how much of a budget they have for marketing, and they don't know how to leverage their marketing and their spend effectively across channels. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that from a business standpoint. Time is a huge part. We overestimate how much time we have and underestimate how much time things will take, almost universally across the board. Your values, what you value, and your mindset are going to shape the decisions you make in your business. So those are kind of the foundational pieces underneath the pillars. From a profit standpoint, is your pricing on point? And does your pricing map to your actual capacity and your revenue goals? I put S&M, but sales and marketing, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Experience, the customer experience, I think is something that gets overlooked for a lot of business owners. And it's so important because if you can get that right, the customer experience right, your referral opportunities go through the roof. And when your referrals go through the roof, you can spend a lot less time and work less doing sales and marketing if you spend a little bit more time on the customer experience. And then the fourth part is, are you playing to your strengths? Is your business built around your strengths, and do you have the resources on hand to support you in the areas that aren't your actual strengths? So for me, my strengths are in planning, message creation, campaign development. I am an awful detailed person and implementer. So I'm hiring someone right now that can help my clients go in and implement the plans we've created, because I can do it, but it is not in my strength. And if I spend my time doing that, my business will ultimately not be profitable for myself because I'm not going to like what I'm doing. And it's going to take me out of the opportunities to generate revenue by focusing on what I am doing. What questions do you have on this pillars for profit concept? Is there an area what area of the 4 pillars do you feel like you're the best at? You can type in the chat box if you own your own business. Or I'd love to hear experience, the customer experience, sales and marketing, pricing. Yeah, it takes time sometimes. Experience, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. A lot of my clients actually really struggle with the customer experience, playing to your strengths, kind of across the board. So now, which of those do you feel like is the biggest struggle for you? The area where you're like, man, if I could improve one of these pillars, it's definitely going to be this one. Pricing. Let me see, I'm reading your areas. Pricing, sales and marketing, team members who are great. That's great that you brought those in. Struggle with the pricing and the timing. Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit, just high level, about sales and marketing today that can help some of you guys. And the pricing thing for your business, if you go through and you do the time, and I'll actually show you now. I pulled this up. I actually go through for my clients and for my business. I'm going to show you my business right here, but actually how many hours do I have? So how many hours does it take for each client? So you can see here for me, for each client, I spend about 15 hours per client on their strategic plan development. implementation support, 12 hours per month on a consistent basis. So if I multiply that by my number of clients goal, that basically this is how many hours that takes per year. Across my team members, I don't want any, because I believe in not working harder, I don't want any of my team members working more than 35 hours a week, ideally 30 hours a week, but there's going to be things that they're doing that aren't client focused, right? Like we have to have marketing time too across the board. So, and we have account for vacation time. So you can see how I've actually done this time part for my business and figured out how much time is it going to take and how much time do I have. And then mapping that to how many clients it will take based on my pricing to hit my revenue goal. So I'll come back and show you guys that too. Is this helpful to see the plan too? Yes, okay. Sometimes it's one thing to talk about it theoretically, but it's another thing to, I'm gonna just have to see, how do I view, slide, navigator. So I'll come up and show you guys right, like the first thing we did, this is all of my overhead for my business. So you can see kind of thinking about that. So the same thing we did on the personal side. And then the revenue goals, basically to hit the revenue goals at the current pricing model, this is how many clients it's going to take. So 44 clients per year that I'm doing strategic marketing plans for, 22 of those at a time that we're doing implementation support for. And then you can see, so in order to do that, this is how much time it would take. So does that map to how much time is actually available? And if it doesn't, then I either need to change my pricing model or change how I'm offering it or figure out how to get more time, right? But what a lot of small businesses do is they don't take the time to actually think about how much time it takes to do what they offer, map that to how much time they have, and then validate that against their pricing to figure out if it's actually a profitable and sustainable model. So you can do this for your business and your personal life. Okay, so now let's go back to this. Okay, so when I talk about marketing, really sales and marketing to me, if you do 4 things, you're going to nail it. So if you say the right things, so you have a compelling message that resonates to the right people, your target market, in the right channels. So where are you marketing, advertising, selling, and communicating at the right time? So with your strategy and your calendar. So if you're saying the right things, you have a compelling message, you have identified your target market. Tamara, I think this actually, when you talk about market value, what you need versus what your customer is willing to pay, that actually gets honed in on your target market. And a lot of times, the thing that a lot of small business owners do is they look to the market to set pricing versus looking to ensure it's profitable. And then basically, if it's profitable, is there a market? And if there's a market, what is it? And it might look different than how the current market has been shaped. So starting with your revenue in mind, and then going into what's the right market that fits into that revenue planning. Or like for me, a lot of my things on my pricing, I love working with small business owners versus large corporations. So if I was to go in and do the same type of campaign and messaging development that I do for my small business clients with these large organizations, I could charge a lot more. So I've had to be creative in my pricing to figure out, in order to hit my revenue goals and stay within the time constraints that I have, how do I price it in a way that is still accessible for small business owners? And that's why there's the higher upfront cost and then a lower monthly retainer cost. So part of it becomes being creative in terms of how you package it too. Did that answer your question, Tamara? If not, just type another one. It's so weird for me not to be able to see people and raise their hands. So again, marketing, what I want to say, my soapbox this in terms of the right channels, for most small business owners, advertising 90% of the time is not a good spend of time or money, because in order for advertising to be effective, it has to be done on a repetitive basis. And most small business owners don't have the marketing or advertising budget that actually supports an effective advertising campaign. And there are some rare instances where it does make sense, but it's hard because what happens in the absence of advertising is that you have to rely more heavily on sales and strategic communications, which takes a lot more vulnerability for a business owner. There's a lot more going out and having conversations, meeting people, cold calling, right? Like that most people, if they don't have a sales background, don't love to do. So what I see a lot of small business owners doing when it comes to the right channels is they don't necessarily have a message that's aligned to the market. Then they go out and they spend advertising dollars, but they don't have enough money invested to do it effectively over time. And then they keep doing advertising that's not necessarily generating the client or the leads that they want. There's a lot of cool things that you can do in terms of marketing and events and strategic partnerships and going out and selling and strategic communications that take time but don't cost money, that can be much more effectively leveraged for most small businesses. So if you own a small business and you're spending money on advertising, what I would encourage each and every one of you to do is go back to that definition of profitability that we talked about and put on paper how many clients have you gained directly from that advertising, that have come into your business, that have hired you because they saw your ad, and then what was the cost per customer based on that advertising acquisition. So if you spent $3,000 to advertise in a specific venue, how many clients came to you from that? And then divide that by $3,000, and that's your cost per customer acquisition for that ad. And then you can start to make strategic choices about if that really is effective. I'm going to show you a message map that I did for a client. I have a client right now who owns a French school. She's super awesome. Where she was really struggling is she was trying to market too many things at the same time, so she wasn't getting any traction. But then she really wanted to focus on this differentiation of herself from her competitors. Every advertising she did, or all the marketing she did, was basically, you sign up for French with us, this is why we're awesome. And the market that she's targeting, most of them are committed to, like, well, if this was Spanish, right? Like, they're already sold on doing Spanish. So she has to first develop messaging around why people should learn French and why they should learn a language. So when we talk about, for small business, saying the right things to the right market at the right time, what a lot of people do in small business is they sell the right thing at the wrong time. So I don't have it in here, but in one of my sales training slides that I do, there's a statistic that about 7% of any market at any time are active buyers in the market. Another 10% are open to buying, but they're not actively buying. Another 30% of the market is going to buy at some time, but isn't going to buy now. And then the rest is divided between soft no's and they're never going to know. Most small businesses spend almost all of their advertising and marketing efforts, time, and financially on that 7% that's actively buying. The challenge with that is then you commoditize what you're doing, but then you're competing in the market where they're actively searching. If you can position your marketing to those people who are going to buy, but buy in the future, or they have a problem, but they haven't yet identified what it is yet, you basically set yourself up so that when they're ready to buy, you don't even have to really differentiate yourself that much because they're already thinking about you. So it's to market to people earlier on where they're at in the sales cycle with a different message. So for her, for example, her client, I'm going to just kind of show you how we got here, is parents who value education and are craving culture, and they feel like something's missing from their children's education, and their kids are only seeing a narrow snapshot of the world, and they're not sure what to do about it. They haven't necessarily decided that learning a foreign language like French and traveling is the way to get there. But if she can market to that, where she hits on the problem and provides a solution, versus marketing to people who are searching for French teachers, she can own a much bigger piece of the market. So I feel like I just gave you guys a lot of information pretty quickly on that last 10-minute marketing thing. What questions do you have? What do you want me to repeat? I'm going to give you a minute to type. And then while I'm waiting to see if you guys have any questions, on a scale to 1 to 5, with 5 being like, I've got it nailed, how would you self-rate yourself on those 4 pillars of kind of marketing we talked about? Saying the right thing to the right audience through the right channels at the right time. So type in the chat box where you feel like you're at on a scale of 1 to 5. 3, 2, 3. Okay. Okay. 2.5, 3.5. So the question is, how do you figure it out? This is the marketing strategy. Like, where do you start? How do you figure this out? Is really sitting down and looking at the business and really getting into the customer's mind. Like, what I'm a big fan of specifically looking at, okay, this is a super easy example that I can use, wedding planners, right? Okay, well, what happens, right? Like, before somebody decides to plan a wedding, the obvious thing is they get engaged. Well, what happens before somebody gets engaged? Well, normally they've been dating for, a year plus, maybe a holiday's coming up, maybe an anniversary. So taking the time to understand, backtrack what happens before the customer decides to buy. 5, awesome, Tamara. And starting there and really being curious about the customer. So what is the customer thinking? What are they really looking at? And oftentimes what the customer thinks is the problem or what they say they want isn't actually what they want. So I love the quote, I think it was by Henry Ford, where if I would have asked my customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse, right? But what they really want is to get somewhere efficiently. So that's the same thing for every business, is to ask, what do they really want? And there's a great tool, it's so simple, but 5 whys, where if you ask why 5 times to any question, kids are great at this, then you'll normally get to the heart of what's happening. So same thing, when your customer, okay, what are they buying? What's important to them? Why is that important to them? Why is that important to them? Why is that important to them? And just even having some of those dialogues with your customers. Someone asked Tamara about social media. I'm not a social media expert either. I'm old school. I feel like social media, to your point, it takes a lot of time. It requires a lot of effort to have impact for most small businesses, unless you're doing it very strategically and really thought out. It's going to be really difficult to do. I think it's a nice caveat and a tool, but I think it can definitely become very cost effective and time intensive for the amount of results that you get. So I would just be curious about what other things can you do to get the message out there. I come from an old school PR background. I think PR placement, getting news articles, being on the news, it takes a little bit of time and planning and having a good pitch. Oh, you've seen that have an impact. Yeah, I would love to talk to someone who's a social media marketer because I am not an expert in that area. I am super old school and I really believe in sales, event marketing, referral marketing, and then kind of using it. But targeted fans, yeah, bloggers, influencer strategy is super important. So lots of great ideas on here on the chat. Okay, I'm gonna hit play again on here. So we've kind of talked about a lot of this. Yeah, I think you have to have both, and that's where I think I'm gonna talk about leverage. The most customers Google us, so a consultant to help with that. Like using the old school tactics with the online. And so I'm going to skip ahead just for a matter of time. Really quickly, purpose over productivity. Focus on impact, not activity. So a lot of times we're very busy, but what is the impact? And if it's not making a difference, don't do it. And being very targeted, what are the 1 to 4 things that are going to drive success in your business? And focus on those. Get them dialed in, do it well. I'm going to talk about. So I'm a big believer that every action you take should be paired with another strategic action. So for example, if you do some old school, right, media placement and you're on the news, then, okay, send that out to your mailing list. Then send that, post it on social media, right? So that everything gets multiple hits. I have a friend who's a stylist and she's amazing, but she talks about this with clothes. She's like, everything in your closet needs to go with at least 3 other pieces. And if it doesn't go with 3 other pieces, it's not worth having. And she's like, and multiple pair of jeans don't count. So she's like, they could be colored jeans and then they count, but just 3 pair of blue jeans doesn't count. And I was like, that's such a great metaphor for marketing and sales, that if you can't leverage something at least 3 times, there's probably a better thing that you can be doing it. Or the other way to flip that question is, how can I use this one thing that I did at least in 2 other places? Because then you're getting way more bang for your buck. So not letting anything just sit in isolation. So if you get a placement in a trade magazine or in a consumer magazine, mailing it out to hard copies to some of your prospects, like, we're so excited, right? Like, because then you're building that credibility and people are seeing it and posting it on social media, and then also putting it on your website in terms of where we're featured to drive that credibility, so that every action is leveraged with another strategic action. And understanding your hinge points. So I love the question from the book, The One Thing. But for example, if you need to drive sales, which for most small businesses they need to do, what's the number one thing that you can do to increase your sales by at least 10% in the next 6 months? So that very specific question, but one thing, right? And understand that one hinge point, that if you get that right, it will affect everything else that you're doing. And to really make choices around how you spend your time based on that. So we're just pretty close on time. Your actions are your priorities. I think that's pretty self-sufficient. What questions do you have? Like, this is all great, but it's not going to work for me because XYZ. Type it into the chat box. And if you don't have a question, I would love to hear from you one thing that you're going to implement this week, so today or tomorrow, from the time that you spent on here. So you spend an hour of your time on this webinar. What's one thing you're going to implement that's going to have an impact in your business to make it worth that hour you spent? Strategic time planning, awesome. Pricing. Yep. The multi-purposes. Yep. Ideal schedule. These are great. Yep. So when I think about how to choose marketing activities, I definitely focus on what's going to have an impact, purpose, how can it be leveraged, and then what are the strengths so that I'm at. So for me, I love public speaking, so that's a big part of my marketing strategy. If I have a client who hates public speaking or hates writing, I'm not going to have them do guest articles to a magazine, right? Because we want to keep the strengths part into our marketing as well. Better define target market. Yep. When you get your target market right, it makes it so much easier to get your message and your channels right. Yeah, these are great. Thank you guys so much for taking an hour of your time to spend with me, for your engagement throughout. If you have questions for me, you can email me, Christy, Christy, at mytimetoprofit.com. I'd love to stay in touch, connect via Facebook. Let me know how I can support you in your businesses. Tracy, do you want me just to send you the slide deck?
Yeah, that would be great. If you can send that out, I'll send it out with the recording today. I'll also make sure to include your contact info, Christy, so that everybody has that.
Perfect. Awesome. This was super fun. So thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. And thank you everybody who was on here. Honestly, this was some of the best, I feel like, interactions even between attendees, and I think that made it really great. And there was a lot of really good takeaways, Christy. So thank you so much. I want to plug really quickly some of our upcoming webinars. So we have this every Wednesday at noon. There's a schedule for some of our upcoming ones, and if you're on the west side of the mountains, we have some upcoming live or in-person events as well. But yeah, if there's no other questions, we'll stay on the line for another moment here, but I'll go ahead and stop the recording, and you're free to go on to the rest of your Wednesday.